As Margaret lay in her hospice bed, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of sadness. Her life was drawing to an end, and she was all alone. She missed her husband, but there was one person, or rather, one creature, she missed more than anyone else: her parrot Charlie. She thought she would never see him again. Until one day, she got the surprise of a lifetime. Before we start, can we get this video to 1,000 likes? Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Knowing how lonely Margaret was, the hospice staff and a bird rescue group worked together to bring Charlie to the hospital to visit her. When Margaret saw him, her face lit up with pure joy, and she immediately reached out to cuddle her soulmate close. It had been so long. Holding the parrot close and stroking his head, Margaret knew it was likely this was the last time she would see him. Margaret tried to persuade the staff to let the parrot stay with her, but that wasn't possible. However, as the bird rescue worker was about to take Charlie away, the parrot did something truly remarkable that shocked and surprised everyone in the room. But what did Charlie do? Margaret was a kind and gentle soul. She had always adored animals and had a special bond with all kinds of creatures. Charlie, her African gray parrot, had been a part of her life for well over 50 years. Margaret had taken in the parrot when she was only 20 and Charlie was barely a year old. He had been sent to a pet shelter for being too difficult, but Margaret had raised him with love and care. Only a few years after her husband's death, Margaret was struck with a cruel blow. Her health began to decline, and by the time the cancer was diagnosed, it was too late for any kind of treatment. Ever since Margaret was diagnosed with cancer, she made it her mission never to let her parrot know how sick she was. She acted as happy as always, no matter the pain she was in. People around town knew about Margaret's situation and sympathized with her. Margaret fought long and hard against cancer, but her health eventually started to decline to the point she could no longer care for herself. She found herself inside more often than outside and started to feel guilty toward her parrot. She had to make a difficult decision. Finally, she made the difficult decision to enter hospice care, even though she knew she wouldn't be able to bring Charlie with her, which broke her heart. But she knew it was best for her and her parrot. Several months later, as Margaret lay in her hospice bed, she found herself reflecting on all the experiences she and Charlie had shared over the years. Sarah, the woman who was the current head of the hospice, was the first to notice Margaret's wistful smile. As she helped the elderly woman back into bed after a shower, she asked what Margaret was smiling about. She turned to Sarah and sighed, "My parrot Charlie. I miss him dreadfully." Sarah had no clue that Margaret even owned a parrot, let alone one that clearly meant so much to her. She listened as Margaret told her many charming stories about the adventures she and Charlie had been on over the years. Margaret had never had children with her husband Jack. They had met when Margaret was 20 years old, solo traveling through Greece. Jack had also been traveling solo, and the two of them had started traveling together. One day, while driving along a back road on a tandem moped, they almost ran over a gangly gray parrot. Margaret immediately told Jack to stop the moped and hurried back up the road toward the bird. The young African gray parrot, who she would come to name Charlie, was staggering in the middle of the road. He was young, hungry, and dehydrated. It was clear he had been abandoned. Margaret scooped up the bird, wrapping him in her jacket for the ride to the vet. Margaret couldn't leave the bird behind, doing everything in her power to take him back home with her. Several months later, Jack joined her. Several months after that, they were married. Charlie was the ring bearer and joined in at the party with everyone else. As the days went by, Sarah and Margaret's bond grew stronger. They sat together almost every afternoon following Margaret's daily short walk, chatting about all the adventures Margaret had gone on with her husband and Charlie. Margaret's cancer was treatment-resistant, so she stopped her chemotherapy to enjoy her last months. However, she was in pain much of the time, and as winter approached, the pain grew worse. Finally, one day, Margaret expressed her final wish to Sarah, hoping she could say goodbye to Charlie. She promised Margaret that she would do everything she could to make it happen she could. After a little research, Sarah discovered that Charlie had already been handed over to a bird rescue center. She called the rescue center to make arrangements. The rescue center told Sarah they were pleased to hear the parrot could visit its owner. As time passed, while they arranged to bring Charlie to the hospice, Margaret's health declined rapidly. She was now unable to get out of bed on her own and needed around-the-clock care. There wasn't much time left. Sarah knew she had to hurry otherwise. Margaret's very last wish wouldn't come true. Sarah and the rescue team agreed they would bring Charlie over as soon as possible. And then it was finally time for Charlie to surprise his old owner. The hospice staff and the Bird Rescue Center worked together to bring Charlie to the hospice. He was a bit shocked by the sudden transfer and was screeching very loudly. But as soon as they entered the hospice, something changed. Charlie suddenly went silent as they carried his cage through the hospice halls. It was as if he knew Margaret was nearby. He kept looking around him as if he was searching for her. And when they reached her room, he couldn't contain his happiness anymore. He started screeching again. She couldn't believe her ears as she listened to the screeches of her beloved parrot. "Charlie," Margaret said with a broken voice. A tear rolled down her cheek, and then her door opened. The moment Margaret saw him, she gasped, and her face lit up with joy. She couldn't believe they had actually brought her beloved bird to her bedside. Finally, she has reunited with her soulmate again. She immediately reached her arms out to cuddle him close. Charlie was just as delighted as Margaret, and it even looked like he did a little happy dance. As they sat together, Margaret told Charlie all of the things she had wanted to say for the past several months. It was a beautiful moment. And Charlie, in turn, listened attentively and nuzzled close to Margaret, as if he understood every word she was saying. Margaret looked at Sarah with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered as she kissed Charlie on his head. "It wasn't just me," Sarah said. "Everyone in this room helped to fulfill your wish, and it wasn't easy." Sarah smiled at Margaret and took in all the love in the room. After a few hours, Charlie had fallen asleep in Margaret's arms, and she herself was also falling asleep. So Sarah and the rescue center staff decided it was time for Charlie to go. Margaret knew she couldn't keep Charlie here forever, and she also knew these would be her final moments. Suddenly, she felt at peace with everything. She had seen and cuddled her beloved parrot. She was surrounded by people, and she felt loved by everyone, especially by Sarah. If this were her last memory, she would be okay with that. So she gave the okie to the rescue staff to take away Charlie. She gave him one last kiss on his head as the staff worker reached his arms out to take him from her. But as soon as Charlie realized this was really it, he did something that no one expected. As the worker grabbed Charlie, he said something for the very first time. "I love you," Charlie said to Margaret. Margaret gasped and looked at Charlie in shock. She had waited her whole life for the parrot to say his first words. She eventually thought he would never be able to talk, but this moment changed everything. Margaret was overwhelmed with emotion, and tears streamed down her face as she whispered back, "I love you too, Charlie. So much. Thank you for being such a special part of my life." The worker then slowly backed away with Charlie in his hands and put him in his cage. Sarah consoled Margaret as they watched Charlie's cage disappear through the door. As Sarah got back to work, she couldn't help but feel emotional. She had never witnessed a moment like that and felt moved by the love between Margaret and her parrot. But she also felt very sad that they had to be apart in their final moments. Why couldn't the bird just stay in her room until the very end? She quickly ran to the front door to see if the rescue center was still in the parking lot, but sadly, they had already left. Sarah felt disappointed but wanted to keep trying. So she headed over to Margaret's room to chat about a possible second reunion. But when she arrived at the room, she was met with a shocking sight. Margaret had passed away. Sarah ran to her bedside but knew it was too late. In the end, Margaret passed away peacefully, feeling loved and at peace, with the memory of her beloved parrot close in her heart. And Charlie, too, lived out the rest of his days in comfort and happiness, always remembering the kind woman who had cared for him for so many years. The end.